Check 1 2. Check 1 2.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. I appreciate everybody being here this morning, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. The last day of conference is always a good thing. Really excited to talk about kind of a hot topic within the industry and Asian exports, and see a lot of familiar faces out there. So that always makes these things a little easier. My name is Ryan Bates. I'm the Business Development Manager with Marwini America Corporation, focusing on RNG development in North America. I've got a fantastic panel that is way more qualified than I am. So I'm going to ask each of these gentlemen to introduce themselves and start with Takashi-san.
Hi, good morning, gentlemen. My name is Takashi Nakashima, but I usually go by Bob. That is my English nickname. Perhaps you guys are wondering my nickname is Bob, also B, but it's a long story. Let me start So I'm a director of Tokigas GX1, and Tokigas is the largest gas utility of Japan, and we are trying to materialize our RNG supply chain from US, from other countries. I'm very happy to be a part of this discussion. Thank you.
Harry?
Thank you, Brian. I'm Ruby Santiago. I'm currently the CEO and General Manager of Alterno Verde. Alterno Verde is a Philippine-based company, so we're doing municipal solid waste digestion, we're doing feed, food, and farms, not at the scale that you guys are doing here, especially the feed, food, and farms, but we are implementing all around Southeast Asia, and now we have plans even in Liberia, Africa. Glad to see you here.
Yes, and fellow Tennessean Tyler.
It's rare to get two RNG Tennesseans on the same stage. Great to meet you all. Tyler Cole. I lead stakeholder engagement for Tree Energy Solutions, or TESS. We're a global synthetic methane project developer. We also operate FSRU in Northwest Germany, bringing in green gases and LNG into the European gas grid. We've got a project in Nebraska that we announced last December with several Japanese gas utilities producing synthetic methane from CO2 and hydrogen and exporting it to Japan. Glad to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Tyler. And certainly last but not least, Mike, will you introduce yourself, please?
And I'm Mike McCurdy. I'm a Vice President with ICF. We
focus on providing independent engineering services for project finance deals. We also do price forecasting, market work in the RIN, LCFS, CFR programs, and finally we do carbon intensity consulting and helping people file for their pathways as well as diligence in project finance.
Wonderful, wonderful. We'll kind of start off with, we're not going to do death by PowerPoint, but of course, wouldn't be wouldn't be worth it if I didn't have at least one slide to share. So, going to kind of leave this up here during most of the panel. Just kind of what's going on in Asia right now. What are the driving factors for Asian export? And right now, the two demand signals we see is Japan and Singapore. Japan has a mandate coming that by 2030, 1% of their gas supply has to be RNG or e-methane. That represents about 10 billion cubic feet a year. METI, which is the government body that is developing these regulations, are still working through the CI targets and what feedstocks are going to be preferred for this. The US right now, obviously, biggest producer of RNG in the world, but also has a unique opportunity because of the amount of LNG exports and LNG infrastructure. So really complements each other. That makes sense that you can easily load on RNG onto an LNG cargo. So again, regulations are still not final. They're slowly trickling in, probably a little bit slower than we had hoped for. I think we were hoping to have a little more guidance than we have right now, but things are still trending in the positive direction, and I have to really applaud Japan because it's slow, but I think they're being very methodical in what they're doing and how they're going about this. The second one, this kind of came up later last year, is Singapore. So Singapore is attracting data centers, and so kind of what they're looking at, all of Singapore's electricity is produced via natural gas turbines, so they are kind of working with these data centers to build what's called a developer sandbox. The first phase is about 300 megawatts, and so they should be awarding those projects soon, but essentially what they're saying to the Googles and Microsofts of the world is you can come and build here, but you have to purchase clean electricity, and with Singapore's footprint, really it's still gas-fired generation. They don't have a lot of available real estate for renewables. So again, 50 megawatts, 6 projects apiece, 300 megawatts total. Another substantial number, looking upward of 17 to 18 billion cubic feet per year, which is about 3 to 4% of Singapore's total gas demand. Similar to Japan, there's still some rules being set in place. They're looking at pricing right now, but we expect that first phase to be awarded here shortly. So again, just kind of a general 30,000 foot view of what's driving the Asian export market. So my first question for the panel: how is RNG anticipated to be used in Asia? Is that transportation, electrical generation, city gas, feedstocks for other fuels like SAF? How do y'all see RNG being used in Asia?
Okay. Yes. So thank you for your question. So in Japan, I think the first priority is to kind of the hard to abate type of the demand. So meaning the heat demand in commercial or industrial sectors and city gas. And of course, it depends on the market conditions. It could be feedstock for the other type of the carbon neutral fuel, such as SAF. But I think mainly, especially around the 2030 or middle of 2030, the most demand for RNG would be the heat demand and city gas, I think.
For countries, developing countries, as you know, most of the Southeast Asian economies are just starting. And as infrastructure goes, the forecast for RNG is really going there. No? For countries like the Philippines, because we do not have yet a structure for RNG, this is a very promising area, a very promising market, especially since
countries like Philippines, Cambodia, and even Thailand, we import a lot of petroleum products. So RNG, once this infrastructure is there, I believe the market will boom.
I know I'm a panelist and not the moderator, but could you talk more about the infrastructure needs?
Well, number one, the size of the farms, for us, for example, we do municipal solid waste. And all of our plants, we have 5 plants now, we have yet to look at RNG. Now, when I was in this conference, I'm looking at RNG as a good substitute instead of us using our gas for, let's say, electricity. Electricity, the grid in countries like the Philippines is very politicized, to say the least. It's run by, of course, old money, oligarchs, stuff like that. If we have an RNG market and someone is willing to buy, then infrastructure can be built. But right now, for Philippines, I can say there is no infrastructure. There's no plant, no capacity to capture and then do RNG, at least for now.
Yeah. Helpful. Thank you. So TESS is a founding member of the ENG Coalition, which is similar to ABC and RNG Coalition, a synthetic methane focused trade association and advocate, and many of our members are Asian companies. And so I am in fact representing the ENG Coalition and not TESS, but I will share both views. I think it's helpful as you're talking, Nervi, to even contextualize that we're not talking about disparate policies. As a US biogas industry, we should think about Asian demand as a larger pool of demand that has different outlets. As Ryan asked, some of that will be for specific sectors. In Japan, right, near-term targets 2030 would be city gas, would be industrial heating. Probably even closer near-term is LNG and bio-LNG for maritime. Singapore's got a big bunkering sandbox there, as well as this data center biomethane sandbox. Other big LNG importers would look at this, like Korea. So it's really not just one program, even though it will start to form that way. And what the coalition has asked me to make sure that the audience gets out of this today is that demand is there, but there are bottlenecks that we need to work through. And if we treat demand as isolated country programs, the real unlock for that bottleneck, which are things like certification and tracking, won't really open the market to Asia broadly the way we want it to, but we can talk more about that.
Yeah, and finally, when we look at an area as complex as Asia, it's really important to understand that RNG, there are really 3 pillars which drive adoption. There's an energy security element, there's an economic jobs development element, as well as a climate element. And so, different countries have different priorities, and we do see particularly Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, Singapore, they've got very aggressive climate aspirations and limited real estate or very expensive real estate. So RNG coming in for some of these markets, city gas, power generation, whatnot, ends up being the least cost compliance method to reach many of their climate goals. So, and then if you go into different countries like Thailand, the Philippines, they're focused more on the job creation aspects and export opportunities. So very, very interesting market, very complex market, but really excited to see people developing programs like the GX ETS program in Japan.
Great. Thank you, gentlemen, for those responses. As I alluded to earlier, I certainly have a much more qualified panel than myself, so that's why I'm the one asking the questions. Tyler, I kind of want to piggyback on what you just alluded to. I'm going to go a little bit out of order, but you mentioned kind of some of the certification schemes and the bottlenecks that you might see. How do these international compliance schemes, ISCC, MRETs, and even I think there's a lot of talk right now about GHG protocol. Curious the panel's opinion on how the certification schemes and really GHG protocol impact the ability to start exporting RNG via bio-LNG into Asian markets.
Yeah, I'm happy to kick that one off. At the risk of getting really deep into the weeds on all of the different acronyms and programs, What's needed is trust for cross-border trading. Without that, the primary benefit of the molecule is its environmental attribute, and so if you can't trust that you have the right claim to that attribute, you're not going to pay the premium that molecule requires to be produced. If you unpack that further, you've got country-to-country trust that's required. So I know Japan and the US have some bilateral agreements around double counting and CO2 and trying to work together, but it's very, very early and squishy and in development, I would say. You have more real, concrete, near-term protocols like GHG protocol, as you mentioned, which most of the world has looked to as a de facto reporting standard for the last 15, 20 years, currently undergoing a major reset of how they rewrite, especially corporate reporting, so not country level, but specific corporates, which will be the entities buying the molecules through cross-border trade. So those companies, specifically like the Japanese gas companies in our case we're talking to, really need to know what they can claim in order to not just comply with the government mandate on volume percentages, but what can I do with it now that I have it? Can I credibly sell it to my city gas customers? And are they able to claim those attributes as well? So the certification is major, because if the end user has clarity that if I'm going to pay for this molecule, I can now reach my climate targets and reduce my Scope 1 emissions credibly, and we've tracked the molecule, we have trustworthy, verifiable chain of custody models, which is another rabbit hole that we can go down, the difference between a mass balance or a book and claim. But it's very, very important, and I think that's the message to highlight here, is those rules are being written right now, and those rules should be written in the next 18 to 24 months, and clarity there gives buyers and countries confidence that they can execute their plans. So if you're not involved in the carbon accounting committees or any of the other committees at ABC or other associations, please get involved, because we need industry to speak up about what are workable solutions for getting our molecules prepared for export.
Mike?
I might add a little bit onto that. One of the big challenges is that the GHG protocol is a GHG inventory program, and most of the reporting programs that are used by the RNG industry are life cycle carbon intensity based. So there is a little bit of translating between the two programs, kind of like a Spanish and French. You can get pretty far if you know one. But there's been a lot of great work done by Centerpoint up in Minnesota to kind of bridge that gap between the two programs. Also, RNG business is benefiting from the sustainable aviation fuel business. So they've been working for a few years now on trying to reconcile the carbon intensity-based system that's used for the production of SAF and then the GHG protocol. So it will be a challenge, to get all these programs in place, particularly with the programs themselves and language differences. But you're not the first one showing up at the door. A lot of the groundwork has already been laid by different parties.
And not the only industry, too.
Yes.
Right, lots of other green molecules are advocating for similar treatment under these protocols.
Yeah, I think a shameless plug for the ABC is reach out to Alicia on those, because she and I've had some great conversations about advocating for GHG protocol, because it just right now doesn't allow for mass balance of RNG, which we all know you're not going to be able to physically move molecules into Asia. We need a mass balance or booking claim system. So she has asked, for industry participants, both producers, for end users, industrial users, to provide support and a voice to her to better advocate for GHG protocol to adopt some of these booking claim procedures for RNG to allow for export.
Yeah, I agree. Yes, excuse me. So actually, I had a few years the continuous dialogue with Japanese end users, such as the commercial and industrial users, including the global pharmaceutical company, food and beverage, and they are very keen to understand what's going on in the JJ protocol or other ISCC type of protocol, especially in terms of the chain of custody. As Japan or like Philippines, such kind of nations, islands, the issue for the supply chain, it would be really important. Actually, previously in Japan, they have strong appetite and interest in the new type of the carbon neutral fuel, such as hydrogen or ammonia. I think this kind of fuel is really, really interesting and important. But I also have to say it will take a little bit longer time for realistic commercialization. So in that context, lots of Japanese consumers are recognized that RNG could be a really, really realistic and practical fuel toward the decarbonization target. So in that context, I would like to hope, I strongly hope that the future regulation design shall be reflect the operational reality, including the liquefaction and the maritime transportation of this kind of carbon neutral fuel.
So the punchline is they just need to get their act together, right?
Yes, and you have to understand that you have in Asia, you have, of course, the first world, the developed countries. Japan is there, Korea, Singapore is there. Then you have on the other side, you have the developing nations who are in need of solutions to primarily manage waste while harvesting that waste. So I join you there that groups like ABC should be able to handhold this government, allow them to develop this RNG market, maybe convince, of course, developing countries that this is the path to take. Unfortunately now, countries like Indonesia have gone really on incineration, and that's very sad. That's really very sad. So while there is a good opportunity, the opportunity has to be taken in the next maybe 3-5 years, not in the next 10 years. So to help develop this market.
So I guess that's a great tie-in, Irving, to kind of my next question, which is, talked a lot about the attitude and the need for RNG and what's driving this demand. Obviously Japan, Singapore, mentioned some of the developing countries, but what other countries should we be looking for? What are some of the other drivers that we can expect to see over the next few years that would import RNG? Right.
Yeah, really from the North American exporter position, the big OECD economies, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, those do tend to be the biggest targets for our clients. Japan imports, I think, 65 million metric tons per year of LNG. Taiwan's about a third of that, and Singapore's, I think Taiwan's about 20 million metric tons, and then Singapore's 5 or 6 million metric tons. So, but each of those countries are all working on incentive programs. Japan's probably the farthest along. Their GX, Green Transformation, ETS fund, that actually started their compliance period here April 1st of 2026. 2028 starts to come into effect where people are paying penalties. Early on, it's got a 1,500 yen to 4,000 yen kind of guardrails. I think that's about $10 a million BTU to $30 a million BTU, or sorry, per ton of CO2. So, the pricing's not where they want it to be yet, but it's starting to get into place, and with different incentive programs, people are talking that's maybe $50 a ton of CO2 to $70 a ton of CO2 in kind of incentive support when you start looking at the 2030s. So, the real it doesn't really start biting until the 2030s, but we just see a lot of interest in really starting to get these contracts set up and whatnot for that delivery in a few years out. So you do have some nice opportunities, particularly if you're developing projects that won't be producing for a few more years, to get some contracts for offtake for export.
Go ahead.
As Mike pointed out, recently Japan started a kind of the GX ETS program. So it's a starting point of the carbon pricing type of the method. But as Tyler pointed out, it's really important to make a kind of monetization of the decarbonization into the end users and the pricing to the consumers, right? And in that context, I'm personally looking for what kind of the reaction will be happen after the implication of the CBAM method in Europe. So such kind of the carbon pricing, I don't know it is good for our economy or not, but it is really important to make a kind of the method or way to monetize. So for instance, for example, in Japan, in our regulation and in our compliance usage, there is no way to evaluate the negative CI score. Right. But if we can monetize the negative CI in Asian market, it could be making game changer in my understanding. So such kind of the circumstances or rule making would be one of the key for future further driver.
I think that's a great point, Bob. That's still the great unknown, not just in Asia, but around the globe, is avoided emissions and how those are going to be accounted for. And, I think kind of what I've seen, at least in my opinion, is the first few, this first wave potential of RNG might be the higher CI target as they're trying to target price, and it's not necessarily a zero, but targeting somewhere in the 40 to 50 range, depending on what calculator they use. And so, that kind of leaves the dairy guys in question, do they get a piece of the pie? And I think, honestly, the answer is right now we don't know, just because we don't know if those negative emissions will be recognized or not. Kind of asked too, because again, this is a biogas panel, but obviously this mandate includes e-methane and synthetic methane as part of this. So I would not be a good moderator if I didn't kind of ask what other biofuels or synthetic fuels could be in competition with bio-LNG, and how can RNG maintain that competitive edge?
I'll jump in as the lone synthetic methane developer on the panel. Our view at TESS and as the ENG Coalition is that bio-LNG and ENG are complementary and not competitors. We believe that for several reasons. One, biogas CO2 is by far the cheapest non-fossil CO2 that you can procure, and we rely on CO2 to produce our ENG. So if you're not familiar with synthetic methane, we produce clean hydrogen and recycled CO2. You synthesize those in a methanation reactor and you have CH4. There's a lot of synergies with biogas production and ENG production. So we believe that they're complementary. We believe that the scalability of ENG can be vastly superior. Superior is probably the wrong word to use at this panel, but the scale can just be different. So our project in Nebraska will produce 4.5 BCF a year of ENG. It'll be larger than the fossil gas production in Nebraska, which is not a gas producing state by and large, but it is a big project, and it's because we have a large supply of 250,000 tons of CO2 that we can use as feedstock. That's really difficult to find at smaller scale sites and then figure out how to distribute and bring. You have that challenge of getting feedstock brought to a centralized production, or do you modularize your ENG production on site at a landfill facility, for example? But my favorite thing to say at this conference is that what's good for RNG is great for ENG. By and large, we will all benefit. The rising tide will lift all boats as green gases get clarity on certification, on chain of custody, on policy, durable policy, hopefully. So we view it not as a competitive threat, but as a complementary complement.
Let me provide additional color
Please.
on behalf of Japanese gas utilities. RNG and e-methane are not viewed as competitors. So it is really important for Asian utility company to diversify the energy resources. And I think as Tyler pointed out, the e-methane has the e-methane characteristic, and the large variety of feedstock and the large variety of technology is a kind of a good point of RNG. So once again, as input, and we have limited landscape and limited energy resources, it is really important to have multiple way for decarbonization. And one additional point from off-takers or long-term buyers' perspectives, the stable supply of the organized feedstock for the RNG could be important point, both in terms of the quality and the volume. But in general, we are happy to have multiple way, and Tokyo Gas is also doing a kind of e-methane business as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and it sounds like too, e-methane is an important part of energy security for Japan as well.
Correct. Yeah.
And, curious to see too, I believe right now the United States is the number 3 exporter of LNG to Japan, behind Malaysia and Australia. So, I think that leads to you couple the number 3 exporter with the number 1 RNG producer. It seems like a pretty successful marriage there.
Yeah. You were talking about alternative fuels, and I'd love to get Mike's perspective on this too, but what you just mentioned, that the same thing I said about RNG and ENG having their tide lift, LNG is the same, right? What's good for LNG exports and use in other markets, we will benefit from as long as we have credible tracking to be able to piggyback on global trade flows of LNG. But that doesn't mean that other countries are not looking at e-methanol, e-SAF, ammonia to power. I think Bob mentioned those are likely further down the development pipe, but I'm curious what else we see competing with RNG.
We really don't, per your earlier comment, it tends to be complementary. Right now the cost of production of RNG is substantially lower than that of e-methane, but out in the 2040s, 2050s, with the reductions in technology cost for renewable electricity and electrolyzers, that's expected to flip. However, when you really look at these grids in different countries, you can get to about 80% renewables when you're using renewables in storage, but after that you need that firm dispatchable power. So, there's not enough energy outside of, you need both the bio RNG as well as the e-methanes to be able to run all those combustion turbines that have to be there to support the grid. So very complementary. We also see people, when a lot of projects, the gasification projects to biomethane, they'll produce about 50% CO2 during that conversion. So what we see people doing is adding hydrogen to make biomethane and e-methane in the same production process. So very, very complementary. Get to leverage all the same tracking mechanisms and everything like that. So I think you'll see a lot of development of both programs together.
And Bob, this question is probably going to be more suited for you representing a Japanese utility, but again, encourage the rest of the panel to jump in as well. But what's kind of been the feedback from your customers when you talk about, because we all know in this room, people sometimes see the price of RNG and it's not warmly received, I might say sometimes, but what's kind of been the reaction you've seen, and what are these customers prioritizing with RNG? Is it cost, CI score, reliability? What are they looking for?
Yeah, very good question. And actually, this is also my question as well. So what is the best way for leverage or increase the revenue for the RNG in Japanese sector? But of course, the price is really important. But once again, harmonize the global standard, global GHG protocol, or the type of the rule would be really important factor for our end users in compressor market. So they are very keen to decarbonize their carbon footprint of their final product, especially if they have the business footprint in European market or overseas market. So I think it is really important factor to find a way to, how can I say, materialize, and it's a kind of the mass balance type of approach. So they don't want to switch all of their city gas into RNG. They totally focus on specific products, specific factory, specific line, and allocate the environmental attribute into specific product. Such kind of the approach and such kind of the transparency would be really, really important to monetize the environmental value of RNG, not only in Japan, but also other Asian market, I think.
Yeah. Just allow me to frame, as I've been saying, markets like Japan and Korea are looking at the value of RNG with regards to GHG reduction. But there's a whole lot of nations that just wants fuel, right? The Philippines holds the record for not only for the most number of karaokes, but because we love to sing, but we have the most expensive electricity in Southeast Asia. We're even higher than Japan. And that now comes mostly from coal. And one of the challenging things that we have countries like Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, where you have a lot of islands that you have to electrify. So RNG, the cost of production is not only that, but the cost to distribute and convert it to power that you can actually dispatch. Now, these are the challenges. And RNG, if we have local production, it means to say we don't need to bring diesel or coal to run those plants. If we have a small, let us say, pineapple production facility in an island, and we do a biogas project there using that as a feedstock, then it reduces reliance on bringing in diesel or coal to that island to generate electricity. So there's that facet, that the value of having RNG or biogas for that matter, it becomes really very feasible. It becomes exciting. And for this conference, I've been going around looking at technologies that can help complement that. And these technologies, this equipment, if you may call it also that, we need reliable equipment. And I think that's one of the opportunities on looking at RNG production, biogas production as a possible market for Southeast Asia.
No, I think that's a great point, Mike, and I'll pitch it to you in a second. We focused on Japan and Singapore and Korea and these nations, but there really is an untapped market, especially Nervi and I spoke a little while ago about there's a tremendous amount of available feedstock in some of these nations. There's still, Indonesia, for example, is one of the largest coffee producers in the world. And I think to your point, you've got a waste management challenge to solve. Once you do that, then you've got, I think, a unique in the developing nations of self-consumption, whereas in the US, we may not be using it to make electricity, but in a nation where you're importing already so much fuel to generate, and quite frankly, not the cleanest fuel, that now it becomes a much more attractive solution in some of these developing nations. So that's a really interesting point. Mike?
Oh, I was going to add a little bit. The Japanese and different countries looking at the GHG protocol for the basis of their programs could potentially be very wise because it would allow the different utilities to wheel those environmental attributes over to the companies that are willing to pay for them. And if you go back in the late 2000s, early 2010s, the California utilities ended up paying a lot more for solar power than the going rate for coal-fired electricity. And those buyers that are willing to pay that extra premium, because you don't need everybody to do it, you just need a certain slice of your client base. It really allows you to push RNG into the markets, and it's consumed by people, maybe a pharmaceutical company or a data center that wants to have zero carbon computing. There are clients willing to pay for those environmental attributes, so they don't have to spread that cost over the rate base.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. We've got probably about 10 minutes before I do want to allow a little bit of time for questions. So, kind of with everything now, there's always geopolitics involved in everything. Again, we keep kind of hammering on, there's really a high level, there's a lack of an international carbon accounting standard. I think everyone in this room recognizes that challenge and that frustration, if you will, that why doesn't Europe treat it the same as the U.S., as Asia, as Australia? And so there's some of those barriers that still need to be broken down. But, curious too, because with Asian exports, it's all so closely tied into LNG, and we know the amount of capital being deployed right now in the U.S. to build more LNG plants. But obviously there's a little skirmish in Iran right now that's kind of sent energy through the roof in certain areas, but curious, how the conflict in Iran might shape how different countries are looking at bio-LNG.
Oh my goodness, this, the price of diesel in the Philippines has almost quadrupled because of what happened. So it's like a wake-up call for everyone. In Thailand, you'd have lines, kilometers, just to get diesel. And I believe that what has happened, as sad as it is jolting everyone. But the thing with local politics, after the crisis has faded away, then you go back to the routine. And when this happened, everyone was calling us up and saying, can we do this for transportation? And I was saying, yeah, maybe 3-4 years from now, because we have just started our gas collection for municipal solid waste. And I believe what happened in the past few months, because of this issue with supply, countries like the Philippines now have something to work on, because it's not a question now, is it going to happen again? It will, definitely. So now energy, particularly we call it energy sovereignty, so allowing us to, and why should we not? We have a lot of biomass in our country, so these are things that government is starting to seriously look into, especially for power production. Power is electricity. When I mean power, electricity is really very critical for countries like Philippines, where we have big and small islands that you have to electrify.
Actually, in Japan, we have a slightly different situation. So, in terms of the feedstock, especially for the garbage, we have no landscape for the landfill. So, and as Tara and Mike pointed out, the energy security issue is also very critical, especially after the Ukraine crisis in Japan. And right now we have a new cabinet, and they are very keen to restart the nuclear power plant, especially around the Tokyo area. And but we in Japan, we also have a strong further demand for the data center and the semiconductor, things like that. So that means I think the zero carbon power shall be allocated into such kind of the new power demand. So there is no room for allocate or no room to electrify the existing industrial heat demand. So that's why we are strongly focusing on the realistic carbon neutral fuel, including RNG. Yeah.
I will venture to say energy security and energy sovereignty is the reason we have our U.S. biofuels energy today. And if we look at our path forward as only delivering decarbonization, we will meet economic realities at every crisis. You rewind to the formation of the RFS pre-shale gas, it's an energy security play, right? And this farmer supporting play. So it's not just energy security, but there's also a co-benefit to another sector of the economy. And I spent 10 years in the ethanol industry, so forgive me for bringing back nightmares. But you look at the way that sector has grown, consolidated, and now has roughly 10 to 15% of production is exported each year because they can meet the mandate for RFS, and then they have additional production volume. But they can do that because they have other co-products that get sold. So I think as we look forward for the U.S. biogas production industry, we're entering that period of consolidation and supply demand and trying to create new export markets. And you get one or two dominoes to fall where you can piggyback on. You've got supportive accounting and certification. You've got existing LNG trade flows. You've got willing buyers in different markets that see less of a premium because we're in a moment of crisis where gas prices are higher, and so that premium feels smaller. I think, the time is now for the RNG industry to capitalize on it, and it's, if, as a sidebar, if the U.S. nuclear industry can't get their act together during this crisis right now, I don't think we're going to have a lot of nuclear happening, and that just means more gas. So don't waste a good crisis is, I think, the moral of the story.
I think that's a great point, Tyler. And you and I spoke earlier, kind of in a previous life too. You lived through the CNG conversion of the difficulty, kind of to Nervy's point, of people go back to what they've always known of diesel's $5 a gallon, and great, everybody should be converting to CNG, but the reality is that doesn't always happen. People they know, well, it's going to come back down eventually. I don't want to spend this money on the front end.
Right.
So I think it's a great takeaway.
And I think I'll take that home and make it into a bumper sticker.
Yeah.
Don't waste a good crisis.
Right?
Right? That's really correct.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
China's not wasting it.
No,
Right
Definitely,
now. I
yes.
mean,
Don't waste a good crisis. Nice bumper sticker.
don't waste a good crisis. Didn't know that's what I wanted the takeaway to be from this panel, but thank you for that. So, I guess with that, before we open up to questions, just kind of want to open up to my guest. Any final comments you want to share with our audience before we open up the floor to any questions?
I don't have any additional, I'll maybe surrender my time for some question time.
I would try and summarize the main takeaways, not just the bumper sticker slogan, and I don't make light of calling a conflict good, but for this group specifically, the bottleneck is not supply, the bottleneck is certification and trust, and that's a near-term opportunity for advocacy and influence that we should not waste. And the other piece I would say selfishly is test, is that RNG and ENG work together, right? So we're in it together, we can count each other as allies.
Well, the point I'd like to make is opportunities for the U.S. I'm looking at technologies. We're looking at how do you develop the trust for this market. Also, the complexity You have on one side very progressive nations, but let us not forget the developing ones who also need that power, who has, of course, a social dimension, environmental dimension as well.
Yeah, so I would like to highlight that. For Japanese gas utility companies, the United States is a really important country, not only in terms of the energy security, but also a wide range of partnership and further opportunities. So given the market liquidity and the size of the U.S. energy market, we would like to make a good collaboration and materialize a strong relationship between U.S. and Asian countries.
Great. And I think for me, Garvey, kind of with your perspective on developing nations, I know this is an Asian panel, but you know, we have a lot of neighbors to the south of us in the Caribbean too. That could be some really good potential targets that some are use diesel and want a more reliable, cleaner, and it's a pretty quick boat ride from, you know, the Gulf Coast over to places like the Virgin Islands, and one I'm personally willing to go check out for myself, but that doesn't necessarily fit with Marubeni's expense strategy either. So I want to thank you guys very much. Want to thank everyone for attending, and we've got a few minutes. Want to open the floor up if anybody has any questions. I believe they've got some microphones up here.
Hey, good morning. Thanks very much for sharing the perspective of the Asian market. Now, the geographic issue is that Asia basically is across the Pacific Ocean from the west coast of the United States. And when we're talking about bringing something from one place to the other, we don't have a pipeline, so we need shipping. But the shipping needs to come from a port, and the United States, in its wonderful wisdom of energy dominance, has built no gas station on the US West Coast in order to actually bring anything to Asia. So the question is, how do we fix that problem of execution that we face in this country in so many dimensions, but also in this particular one, because apparently we like to rely on our partners that we don't like in Mexico and Canada to export through the ports there. Further, the pricing right now suggests that the European market is a more attractive market for LNG than the Asian market. So that raises the question, when is the Asian market willing to pay the prices that the Rotterdam market is suggesting? And agreed, also Rotterdam needs to export to Houston, which is not the most direct path, and I understand that math may not be a strength in the United States, but maybe geography should at some point become.
No, thank you very much for your question. So I guess, you know, kind of address his first point. You know, ask you gentlemen about permitting on the West Coast and building facilities, and my one comment would be, if you can help us get a permit in California, I will personally run your presidential campaign. But curious everyone's comment. You know, obviously we've got LNG Canada, I think Coastal Azul in Mexico, but and of course there's the geopolitics of the Panama Canal that can't be ignored either. But would like y'all's perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, just the permitting duration to get a LNG export facility permitted is too long. Even, you know, if they wanted to try and start building one today, tried to eliminate most all the permitting requirements, you know, you're still not going to get it done by 2029, 2030. So it's, you know, unfortunately the Mexican and Canadian pathways do seem to be the most feasible export options for us from the United States, just given the water shortages in the Panama Canal, which is kind of limit the opportunity to export there. And you are correct, you know, if you run the numbers, Europe is still it's a more lucrative market right now than Asia, but there's also opportunities for longer term agreements in Asia. So, you know, if you compare spot markets It's not necessarily at parity, but there are a lot of good Asian partners that are willing to do longer-term agreements, allowing for the financing of facilities.
I do. I would say that, you know, if you're building a facility in 29 or 30, then it's perfectly fine to bring a whole bunch of bio-LNG online in order to export through California. And I would argue that if you're actually building a dedicated bio-LNG export facility in California, it's going to be hard for, you know, whoever is our governor at that point to kind of, or particularly the current governor, to actually disagree with that. I mean, Jerry Brown, for instance, was all in favor of that. It's just not being executed, right? So, you know, 2029, 2030 it's going to take us 2 years to build one, or 18 months to build one biogas facility, plus permitting, right? So you pile that on, you might be there when we need it.
But many of the largest energy export, or the largest energy businesses are currently shuttering their California refineries, and so it's a hard sell to say, well, shut this one down, but we're gonna build a new infrastructure for you. So I certainly share your opinion. You know, it would be tremendously beneficial to have some U.S. export options, but yeah, just due to the permitting, I just don't see it happening anytime in the near future.
I would venture the safer path is to get book and claim and show pipe connectivity to Mexico or Canada and be able to compete on the attribute. Has a higher likelihood of happening in the time frame that we're discussing than asking an importing West Coast blue state to build a bio-LNG terminal. Is that a 5-minute handle? Okay.
5 minutes. Any other questions? Nobody's snoring, so I guess that's a good thing still. Okay. Well, I certainly appreciate, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Brad Demare from Enbridge. Can you, in a very simple way, kind of break down the steps that it's going to take to give the confidence for the Japanese buyers to buy North American RNG? I know there's already been a test case that's been done through BP and Archaea. Any comments on how that's worked out, results from that, and then maybe just walk us through the timeline-based steps where we have the certainty from METI and from the Japanese government where we could start the procurement, like actual ink and signed deals?
Yeah, thank you so much for your question. So from Japanese, especially Japanese government perspective, I think one of the key factors is the transparency of the supply chain, including the CS score, chain of custody, and verification, the might extend like that. So as Japan is a nation island, it is really important to understand who create this RNG and how to deliver this kind of the track record and the transparency and maybe getting the third-party certification. Such kind of the additional information would be really valuable aside from the price of the RNG.
I think what I've seen in this space as a trader has been, you know, we were hoping METI would have some better guidance at their March meeting. It wasn't negative, but it just kind of kept pushing the can down the road. And I hate to keep using the punching bag of greenhouse gas protocol, but I do think that is the biggest barrier. I think for me, I was hoping to start doing some smaller pilots of, you know, a couple 100,000 decatherms, you know, towards the end of 26, 27, just to kind of do a proof of concept, lower volumes, lower risk. To kind of flush out some of this. So I wish, Brad, I had a good answer for when METI was going to come up with an answer, but obviously the clock is ticking, so I'm hoping maybe this time in 27 we've got some solid guidance and we know what GHG is going to do that's going to give METI some guidance. Because again, I think similarly, so many of those Japanese companies do business internationally that the Japanese government's not trying to upset what they're doing with GHG protocol. So I'm hopeful sometime next year. And then once that guidance is done, then I think that's when you'll start seeing test cases done. And then because it's not going to be a light switch where all of a sudden 10 BCF a year is flowing out in 2030. It's going to be a ramp up process.
Yeah, so do we.
Yes.
Maybe adding a little bit to that, a lot of what we hear about is finalizing 45Z. They do seem to be targeting towards that suitable for use in a highway aircraft, so you wouldn't necessarily have to log that into a transportation program. So if 45Z provides that production tax credit for export, that knocks down the ultimate sale price in Japan or other countries. So we have some work to do here in the U.S. Getting those rules finished up, and that'll help with the whole value stack going into Asia.
I think that's a great point, Mike, that I think everyone has probably confirmed and reconfirmed that Asian exports, you are still eligible for 45Z credits as a producer, so that's a big win. Anybody else? Like at 1 minute left. No time like the present. One more.
Hi, how are you guys? I'm Mike Lemon. I've been in this industry probably about 15 years, most known for pursuing the renewable fuel standard, renewable electricity pathway. And just given the comments on the global energy crunch that we're feeling, and I mean really SIDS, small island developing states and nations, they feel it when a fifth of the oil market drops out of the bottom. So with this policy and the background, right, it's not climate change, it's not reducing carbon intensity, it is a mandate, the renewable fuel standard, to reduce reliance on foreign fossil fuel. So with that, just some comments on the prospects of whether or not we actually get that done or let it just sort of fade into the future.
Get what done specifically? Just
Activating the electric pathway, so that way stranded biogas facilities that are so rural they don't even have cooking gas have access to these markets.
As a e-methane producer with power as our feedstock to split water and produce hydrogen, familiar with the fight, optimistic we can pick this back up before set 3 in the next 12 months. Now, our pathway is going to be different because we're delivering a fuel, so I hesitate to speak for the industry on whether the current administration will change its mind on electricity as a fuel. I would be slow to comment, skeptical that we could get anything done before 28, personally, but to be seen.
Well, they did the most recent set 2 rules. They specifically excluded the electricity pathways out of the RFS, so the EPA would have to retract that decision and put forth another one.
Great. Well, again, sincere appreciation for my esteemed colleagues here and everyone in attendance. Thank you so much for attending. Again, feel free. You can find all of us in the app and with our contact information with any questions. Happy to follow up. And safe travels back home for everybody today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.